This video is one of a series of conversations that highlight the contributions of individuals whose work inspires ecological and societal resilience. I'm Matthew Durr, trustee and executive director of the foundation. We're grateful to have the opportunity to share this series of conversations with people who knew the theologian, philosopher, and writer Ivan Illich, whose contributions to our understanding of an increasingly mechanistic, institutionalized, and technologically driven world are so important today. The role we've played in creating this opportunity for conversations to take place was inspired by Neto Leão and Isabelle Cedotti. Isabelle and Neto have embarked on a journey to find other people interested in the work of Ivan Illich. Along with friends and teachers, they created the Thinking After Illich project. In 2023, the foundation awarded Neto and Isabelle a fellowship to engage in conversations with people who knew and were inspired by Ivan Illich.
It always starts with me reading a book of Illich. I was 25 years old, and I had this feeling of a man who is writing with blood, with a way of living behind his words, and this way of living shared with people. And this feeling of, hey, let's get to know, since we cannot meet Illich anymore, I'm talking about 2014, Illich died 2002, let's see if we can meet at least his students, his collaborators. I shared this idea with Isabelle, who is a painter, who is above all at that time and continues until today devoted to painting portraits. We came up with this idea that we named Gaze Project, which is a way of meeting Illich's friends and collaborators, also together with Isabelle painting a portrait of the person we would eventually meet. And that meant, above all, living everything in Brazil, gathering our $500 and going to the US, hoping that we would find hospitality and friendship. As they say, hope does not disappoint. And we found people who were willing to welcome us in.
He was a person who inspired me all the time. He was a kind of teacher. He was a little bit more than a friend. It's difficult to tell you what he was. He still is somehow.
You mentioned some concepts that were part of your encounters and meetings with Illich, and one of them is the commons, for example. But there are any other concepts that can flesh out the condition we're living in, and that helps at least opening a window in our imaginary space for thinking what is possible?
Well, one concept that was extremely important is when he says that modernity is a chapter of the history of the church. You see? That is very important, for me at least. In fact, that made me understand how important is this encyclica. Because I have the impression, I mean, you know, I didn't read much Illich, you know. I'm sure I only read all the Perte d'Essence because I translated it. If not, he was too intellectual for me sometimes. So the meeting and the communicating of Illich was when he was here and we were speaking about things, you know. Mm-hmm. Some pieces I could read a piece, I could read an article, I could read things like that, and were fantastic. But I couldn't sort of follow everything of a book. It was sort of mind striking a bit. Mm-hmm. But that point, I think, is essential. I think he thought that this making the world an instrument of something else could start from the Scholastica, della Scholastica, when they started saying that the sacraments were instruments of grace or something like that. And that was the idea that it was a seed of a kind of thinking that developed.
I think when somebody like Ivan contributes to the world in the way he did through ideas, he plants seeds, and it's only after his death that the seeds begin to grow. And in a way, the fruits of those particular seeds are not necessarily what he was thinking. Mm-hmm. It's something that's moved beyond him, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. He didn't like modernity. And that was really the focus of his critique, all the different aspects of modernity. So in order not to be part of it, he used to often say, inside myself, I live in the 12th century. The 12th century is a comfortable place for me to be in, so I'm happy there. So it's from the perspective of the 12th century that I look at modernity. Mm-hmm. So he's outside the bubble, which I think is necessary. If you're going to critique something in today's world, you have to stand outside of it. You can't really critique it if you're in the middle of it. I can't really critique schooling if I'm a teacher in the school. I'm too caught up in so many things. So, and it's the same with the church. You know, I couldn't really critique the church until I left it, even though I was trying to critique it while I was within it. So he took this position of sort of, in his mind, living in the 12th century and looking at modernity from that point of view. And I think when you do something like that, you begin to see things that nobody else sees, because we just take them for granted. But if you stand outside the bubble and look in, you see all the different key energies that are moving within that bubble, that are causing people to live in a certain way and say certain things and have a lifestyle that's dictated by this bubble. And I think that helped him to see that that modernity is it's a distortion. It's not natural. It's in our. I don't know what words he would use, but these are my words. You know, that there's a more natural way to live, and he found it in indigenous peoples, and he found it in ancient traditions and ancient cultures, and that's what he tried to promote.
My way of understanding that piece of Illich in saying modernity is a chapter of the history of the church pushed me to sort of criticize Galileo, because in fact Galileo, who was officially very close to the church, to Christianity, but at the same time he made this sort of cut between the church and the way we look at the world. Scientists started speaking a language that not everybody could understand.
What attracted me to Ivan was that I intuited that these systems, these institutions which were in my life, education and the church in particular, let's say, and both of them, I intuited that both of them were very manipulative and depowering of people. And then I read Illich and I talked to Illich and we had these conversations, and I began to see that he had found a way to name it and to write about it. So that brought it much more into my awareness and into my consciousness. And it actually confirmed what I already knew. I think the key contribution which I see Ivan making to the world is to stand back from the world that you've been born into and observe it from a distance and see all the energies and structures and institutions which are pushing you in a certain direction.
I have prepared a little because my English is not so good, but I try my very best. Ivan was a master of irony. And often enough, when he made a statement, I didn't know if he was speaking ironically or seriously. When I confront him with questions now, more than 20 years after his death, I never get a clear answer. Only quite ordinary questions concerning everyday's routines were answered directly and outright. With most of the others, the essential ones, he preferred to take me along an extended detour, in the end of which I would have liked to ask him, "But Ivan, what has all this to do with my question?" Instead of fobbing me off with an answer, he opened different possibilities to ask that could foster new ways of thinking. Thinking is a subsistent occupation. Everybody can and should do it himself. It is no good to leave it to scientists, philosophers, and all kinds of experts, not even Ivan Illich. Therefore, Ivan, instead of answers, gave our questions back to us until the horizon widened and things could be seen in a different light.
There is no conception that can be of everybody, because what you see means. So when you have symbols, and the symbols sort of have a very important and even poetical meaning, which when you have a materialistic way of looking, then all reality becomes the religion of materialism, which is a religion, of course.
Of course.
I understand, I've understood after some years why he was so suspicious about rules, laws, and governments. When I was in the commune here in Florence, I did some little things that could have had provoked some changement and so on. But then after a few years they were completely destroyed. So you always make compromises and so on. While if in the mentality of the people something passes, then it can also provoke some changement of the laws. But if you don't have a culture that is different, there's nothing to do. And it's very difficult to change culture in a society like that. But it's the only way. There's nothing else, at least as I think. Of course, the way that they have changed all the situation is through technology. When you impose a technology that is much worse than imposing a dictatorship. Because a dictator can die. Technology never dies, it goes on and on, you see.
He was able to call on me and to say, "Marianne, can you be within 2 hours at Bielefeld? I am changing train there and I've an hour. I have an hour." And I packed my things together
And when?
traveled to Bielefeld.
Wow.
And then we talked an hour and then These are sentences from Ivan himself. "I cannot avoid to be surrounded by helpers, by saviors, and by healers, and to feel threatened by them. I cannot avoid that. But," and yes, now that's the big but, "I don't want to belong to this world. I want to feel myself as stranger, as pilgrim, as outsider, as visitor, and as prisoner."
He was a rebel from the start, so he wasn't going to be comfortable, I think, with being closed in or being limited. And when he sort of fully matured as an adult and began to work first of all in Puerto Rico, I think. No, first of all in Manhattan.
In Manhattan.
And then in Puerto Rico.
Then in Puerto Rico.
All these ideas that were sort of seeds in his youth. And these, if you like, rebellious seeds or wanting to look at things differently, began to come out and manifest.
It's a way of being free, without being secure, without being safe. Freedom and safety are two are contrahands. If you want to have safety, you must agree to a loss of freedom.
Yes.
Always. That's what Erich Fromm taught me. If you want to have freedom, you must have a loss of security. That's the other thing. And if you want security, you have to agree to a loss of freedom. But I think the modern engineering spirit strives for a win-win situation. They like to have freedom because they can do all the things that are necessary themselves with the help of techniques. And they are the inventors of these, so they are sovereign. They think they are sovereign, and so they can free and secure in the same direction. And this will not function. Freedom and security will be two very different things, and if you want to have safety, you have to agree to a loss of security. There are no win-win situations in the world. In this world, no.
He was very true to who he really was and what his work really was about, and he really didn't tolerate anybody who tried to push him in another direction, which I found really great. He was very true to his own principles. I think that's what I admired most about him.
I have been very happy to meet Ivan Illich, and from the first moment I met him at the first meeting, I knew he would be an important person in my life. And when I speak to other people who have known him, they tell something very similar. There has been, maybe there was a glamour in his eyes, something that was full of light, and he was a very, very attentive looker on your face. You knew, yeah, there was you couldn't bear his gaze. His great idea was that always surprise is very, very important. You must be open to surprise, otherwise you will understand nothing.
So there's a song that we sing here quite regularly in our ceremonies. And I'm going to sing it for you, right?
Please.
The river is flowing, growing and flowing. The river is flowing down to the sea. Mother, won't you carry me? Your child I will always be. Mother, won't you carry me down to the sea?